Hi, I'm Ron Sprunberg, co-founder and CEO of Hi Mama. Welcome to our podcast about all things early childhood education.
On episode 50 of the show, we speak with Titus Dostromitios, the Director of Policy and Research at Strategies for Children, a policy and advocacy organization focused on delivering high-quality early ed in Massachusetts. In our conversation, we learn about how Strategies for Children has used statewide data to reframe the conversation focus away from childcare as simply babysitting to early childhood education as part of a learning continuum that feeds into the K-12 education system. Titus also talks about the necessity of collaboration between stakeholders in the early ed space and the importance of a mixed delivery system that is capable of solving problems for local communities and creating real impact. If you are an educator or advocate who believes that education starts at birth and never truly ends, then stay tuned to this episode of the Preschool Podcast.
Titus, welcome to the Preschool Podcast.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much.
Now, Titus, let's start off by hearing a little bit more about Strategies for Children and what that organization does.
Sure. So Strategies for Children is a policy and advocacy organization that's based in Boston, Massachusetts. We advocate statewide here in Massachusetts in the U.S. For increased access to high-quality early childhood education for all children. There's basically, I think, strategies-like organization in each of the 50 states. As you might imagine, early childhood education is a very, hot topic for policy and for advocacy and researchers. But the policies itself are really state by state. There's a lot of variation in the U.S. in terms of what each state's level of support looks like. But Strategies has been at this for 16 years. I've been with the organization for 8.5 years. We kind of have a vision that, by 2020, Massachusetts will stand out as a leader among all states in its commitment to this issue. We trail many states in early childhood education right now, which is something people are usually surprised to hear because Massachusetts has a very strong K-12 education system and very strong higher education, public and private. But the early childhood system is good, but we have a long way to go to sort of achieve the level of investment that we feel as advocates are needed here in Massachusetts to serve all children and families.
That is interesting. And you're the Director of Research and Policies at Strategies for Children. Can you tell us why you chose to go this route with your career and why you do what you do?
Sure, happy to. So I used to work in schools and community-based organizations, started working with middle school age students, and then elementary school. I sort of kept working with younger and younger students over the first few years since I got out of college. And then I went to graduate school to learn about policy. I wasn't necessarily thinking early childhood, although I did really like working with younger children. I was a teacher's assistant in a second grade classroom, and I also worked with kindergarten age students. But where I'm from, the state of Rhode Island, there's a lot of variation from town to town and even parts of cities based on socioeconomics and program offerings and funding levels and things of that nature. So for the smallest state in the United States, Rhode Island, where I grew up, there's actually a lot of variation based on, what kind of access different children and families have to different opportunities. So seeing that firsthand by working in different schools, different towns, different programs, after school, summer, during the school year, school day type programs, I started to really just take an interest in why. Why is it that some children have access to every opportunity you could think of, and other children are struggling day to day just to get through the day, just to really like survive in middle school in some parts of the state. I didn't think that was fair, but I also didn't know why the system was the way it was. So I thought that getting a graduate degree would help me answer some of those questions. And my program was in urban education policy at Brown University. So yeah, it definitely helped me answer some of those questions, but it also gave me new questions to think about. The more questions you answer, the more you uncover, new questions that you have to try and figure out.
Totally.
But that's kind of the way life works.
Exactly. Now, you went on to study a bit more about education and urban environments. You spent some time there yourself. And it's really interesting, like you said, to understand that, why is it that different neighborhoods, different cities, different towns have different levels of quality across the educational spectrum. And of course, that's one of the big challenges we're facing. And you mentioned yourself that Massachusetts is seeking to be a leader in early childhood education, but still has a bit of work today. Still has a bit more work to do. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the current status of early childhood education is in Massachusetts, and how does that compare to some of the other states in the U.S.?
Sure. Okay, so Massachusetts we are a leader in certain aspects of early childhood system building. I think that's definitely true. We established the first in the nation consolidated Department of Early Childhood Education and Care at the state level, and that was in, I believe, 2006, before I joined the organization. Since then, many other states have followed suit and created early childhood offices or agencies at the state level that are really on par with their K-12 agencies. In Massachusetts, we have a system where there are 3 education agencies: early education and care, the K-12 agency that is called the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and then we have a Department of Higher Education. And all 3 of those are on relatively equal terms in terms of governance and status, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. They all report to a Secretary of Education who reports directly to our governor.
And can you clarify quickly why that system piece is important?
So I believe the intention, again, this work predates me, but it has a lot to do with strategies for children's main focus in the early years of the organization's history. I believe the importance lies with just making sure that young children are seen as important as school-age children, right, or college-age students. Yeah. And that even the phrase child care, which it was prior to that time period, 2006, it was. These funds were administrated by an Office of Child Care. Well, the group of advocates, led in part by Strategies for Children, came together and decided, let's call this early education and care. Strategies actually commissioned a poll, a statewide voter poll, that found that voters weren't as interested at the time in supporting childcare, but they were quite intrigued by the idea of supporting a child's early education and early growth and development.
Interesting.
So when you make that shift from childcare to early childhood education, or high quality early education, which we've said we use many times to make sure that the quality piece gets in there, I think it's a different conversation. And totally. I think that has helped to, in some ways, legitimize the field of early education and care in the eyes of folks who might not be as acquainted with it. Folks in the legislature, business community, elected officials, even K-12. The kindergarten through grade 12 sort of establishment of schools, principals, superintendents, teachers. This is not babysitting. This is high-quality early childhood development, and it should be treated as such.
And what about some of the other areas in terms of what Massachusetts is doing relative to other states? So you mentioned system building is quite strong. What are the areas for improvement, for example?
Sure. So the governance is strong. The system building is quite good and thoughtful. We, as advocates, are now trying to push on two pieces. One is the workforce, which had been relatively neglected up until recent years. We have started to look at data on our early education and care workforce, and it's kind of shocking how low the salaries are, how high the turnover is. The average salary is about $25,000 in the field for early education and care teacher. Turnover rate is about 30%, and so we're paying these borderline poverty wages for teachers that we're expecting will be able to close the achievement gap and help children get ready to succeed in school. So there's a mismatch between what our vision and hope is for the system and the level of investment there is in the teachers of the young children. Another statistic, 39% of early educators in Massachusetts are on some form of public assistance, so whether it's the Earned Income Tax Credit, Medicaid, food stamps, or TANF, those are different programs, but that's a very high number. If we paid the educators more, especially, when you get into education, training, and professional development, and the wages that should go along with that, then those numbers of public assistance wouldn't be as high. You could have a family-sustaining wage and career, and, you would just be in overall better off shape, and turnover would go down, program quality would go up. It's kind of a win-win all around. So a lot of advocates in Massachusetts now are focusing on that workforce piece and finding some success, too. Our legislature, this session, this budget cycle is probably going to invest in the workforce. We haven't seen the final budget yet, but the proposals have been positive, and our governor has made some investments as well. So that is very encouraging.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it all has to start from, I guess, right? Is for your government to say, hey, this is an important thing for our state or our province. We're going to invest in early childhood education, and we're going to put money in the budget to put our money where our mouth is and put that money towards salaries and compensation that makes sense for the workforce where they can deliver the quality of education we're looking for.
Agreed. So I was going to mention a second area too. So, there are these terms that anyone in the early education field will know. Access, quality, workforce, they're sort of shortcut terms for the policies and the challenges behind each of those terms. Mm-hmm. So, access we thought was pretty good, and we actually spent many years pushing on quality because we thought that was the kind of missing piece from this government funding and investment in quality as well as the workforce. But in recent years, we've started to uncover that in many parts of the state, access is actually not that great. We have what we call gateway cities in Massachusetts. So these are the smaller cities, smaller than Boston. Everyone knows Boston. Boston is actually doing fairly well with its universal preschool vision and program. But we have a dozen or more small cities throughout the state that are, not necessarily getting the same level of investment as Boston, and the numbers reflect that. So these cities, many of them, completed preschool plans last spring. Mm-hmm. And Strategies for Children is a thought partner to local communities, so we worked with several of the communities on their preschool plans. And what you find is many children, high percentages of children in these small urban cities are coming to kindergarten without having any form of preschool whatsoever before kindergarten. So 47% of kids in Springfield, Massachusetts, 50% of kids in Fall River, Massachusetts, 53% of children in Brockton are coming to kindergarten at age 6 without having any early learning experience in a formal program setting. They may be in a play group, or they may have access to museums and libraries and things like that, but they're not getting a high quality preschool experience. So that, I think, is still something that a lot of people don't know. We sort of assume that there are investments in these areas, and that the neediest children are somewhere, whether it's Head Start or they have a child care voucher or subsidy, but that's not always the case. There are huge wait lists for the child care subsidies, but then there are also, when you look at it specifically from a preschool point of view, there are high percentages of children who are not in programs. And that's one of the areas, along with workforce, that we think Massachusetts could do a better job in. We have filed legislation two years in a row, 2 legislative sessions in a row, to phase in preschool expansion to these communities, beginning with high needs communities who also have a plan and are ready to go with implementing a plan.
So is that really then about supporting the municipalities and providing more spaces?
It could be, because we think that the local community is in the best position to tell the state what it needs. So if it has facilities, then maybe it doesn't need them. I know Fall River, one of the communities I mentioned, I just heard at a meeting last week that they actually are out of space, and they lost 2 Head Start programs which closed recently. And so the space factor is very real in that community, but that's not always the case in every community. Sometimes it's just the collaboration that's needed. So we advocate at Strategies for a mixed delivery system or mixed provider system. I'm not sure if you use these same terms in Canada, but we want to see public schools working hand in hand with community-based nonprofits and the private programs like YMCA, Head Start, independent centers, large centers, small centers, and home-based childcare too, which we call family childcare. And sometimes what's needed is an incentive for all of those different players to come together and collaborate on a plan or a project. And to its credit, the state has funded those types of planning grants and alignment grants in the past. We think that is a very good practice because you're breaking down the silos that divide everyone in the early childhood sector, and you're putting in some strong incentives for collaboration and making it easier for folks to collaborate than to not collaborate.
Yeah, I know, like one of the points of conversation on this as well, which I think is aligned to your point about getting the different stakeholders in the community to work together, is around this concept of, on the one side, we want preschool programs, early childhood education programs to get children ready for school, but there's also the other way to look at it, the other perspective of, okay, well, we also want the schools, the kindergarten, grade 1 programs to learn more about what's happening in early childhood education, so they're ready to accept those children, and where can we get that sort of overlap?
Exactly. It's a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
We want the power dynamics to be such that everyone is an expert in their particular area. And it's not the public schools coming in and saying, do it our way. Yeah. It's, what can we learn from you? And what can community-based organizations learn from, these large organizations that are public school districts? Because they have certain capacities and staffing expertise that are not present in small, community-based early education programs. So yeah, there's definitely something everyone can learn and use to improve the sort of menu of offerings for children and families.
Totally. And just diving in a little bit deeper on one of the points
Sure.
I was reading about Strategies for Children, which is one of their goals, which is ensuring that Massachusetts children become proficient readers by the end of third grade. And the reason I just bring that up is because it seems like quite a specific goal. So I'm curious to know, why was that chosen as a goal over other potential goals?
Ron, yes, this is. It's funny that you ask. In the past couple of years, we've sort of modified our mission to have a stronger focus on the birth to 5 years than necessarily the birth through third grade continuum, although we are still very much committed to that early childhood continuum that starts at birth or prenatally and goes through third grade. So that's like the one thing that amuses me somewhat about your question. But yeah, so this all started roughly in 2008, 2009, right around the time when I came to Strategies for Children. We were noticing that every year when the state education agency would release test data, right, for the annual accountability tests that are taken. Every state has their own test. In Massachusetts, it was called MCAS at the time. The newspaper headlines were always about 10th grade. Basically the story was education system is improving. It's working as intended. 10th grade scores are increasing. By the way, high school graduation rates are also improving slowly but steadily. And so, we just need to kind of keep doing more of the same and heading in the right direction. But that doesn't help us as advocates for high-quality early childhood education. So we knew that the earliest tested grade was the third grade, and the test data on that goes back to the year 2001. So we were able to create charts pretty easily using Excel or other programs that just show the flat performance in third grade reading since 2001 in Massachusetts. So we discovered that the third grade reading scores were stagnant, even though these 10th grade scores were improving slowly. B, the overall level of performance wasn't that high to begin with. We only had something like between 56 and 65% in any given year of students reading proficiently. So that still left roughly 40% of children statewide who were not meeting that benchmark, and that's the basic benchmark of proficiency. 3, there was a huge achievement gap between, if you look at it by race or by income, you would find large achievement gaps. The chart I'm looking at right now is sort of the chart between low-income students and students from non-low-income families. So, large achievement gap. The achievement gap at that grade had not been closing since 2001 when we were first administering this test. So lots of questions, and by looking at that data, and then talking about that data with people, with legislators, with reporters, with advocates, we were able to change the conversation somewhat from the conversation that we had been hearing every year that this is kind of a 10th grade issue, to bring it down to the third grade level, and by bringing it down to the third grade level, we were able to pivot somewhat and talk about that whole continuum. The secret to third grade reading scores is not to get a new curriculum in third grade. It's to work from birth all the way through age 8 or 9. And think about that entire continuum, working with families, infant toddler programs, preschool programs, home visiting programs, and of course the early elementary grades, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. So there's been, since that time, there has been a lot of, there have been several studies, reports, policy recommendations geared towards this goal. We are actually, Strategies is a part of the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading, which shares this goal of third grade reading proficiency. And this campaign is a network of more than 100 cities throughout the country that are all committed at the local level to moving the needle on third grade reading through a variety of strategies. And yeah, so it's something that we're definitely still monitoring. They're actually redoing the test right now in Massachusetts. So our trend line data is, we've taken a year or two off from trying to make these charts because the metric will change. The test itself is going to fundamentally change. So we'll have to start making new charts. But the point is, we still think it is a very important goal. And it is something that can bring more attention to the early childhood years if you talk about it in the right way with policymakers and the general public.
Yeah, and that's the point that I just wanted to bring out again about why I asked the question and your response is that Strategies for Children has used data that was available to you through these formalized state tests to raise awareness about early childhood education and change the conversation from 10th grade scores to third grade test scores. And now you're focusing on the even earlier ages. And it's a very specific goal, and you obviously have wider goals as Strategy for Children, but you're very pragmatic in using that information to further a very important agenda. And I think that's something that's worth talking about in the ECE community is, how can we use data and how can we be more pragmatic about what's available to us to advocate for early childhood education and change the conversation to the importance of early childhood education. And even though we might have wider ambitions. And I think that's sort of a really great case study of that.
Yeah, thank you. We have focused in the past 2 years primarily on 3- and 4-year-olds. And, our next as an organization, thing that we want to raise awareness about is where are all the 4-year-olds? Where are all the 3-year-olds? There's no data that we have in Massachusetts that can answer that question. And it's something that we think is very important because if you know where children are or are not, in terms of their access to programming, then I think the conversation about early childhood becomes more real, and it becomes a local conversation, not just a more abstract state level or national conversation.
Yeah,
these are real children, real families, real communities. And by the way, in one real community in Massachusetts, 53% of these children are not anywhere before kindergarten. I think that's kind of the next frontier that we see in terms of some of our advocacy.
Yeah, and there is the data is quite scarce on a lot of the information we would like to know about early childhood education, I think. So, and we always push on the Preschool podcast the importance of data and making decisions on data and science. So again, I would agree with you on that 100%. Again, I think Strategies for Children, really awesome example of how you've made great progress in moving the conversation forward on early childhood education through both some very specific campaigns and goals and also maintaining that wider mission of having Massachusetts be a leader in early childhood education for 2020. Some very awesome stuff. Titus, where would people go to learn more about Strategies for Children and your work there?
Sure. So you can go to our website, strategiesforchildren.org. You can follow us on Twitter at EarlyEd4All. That's the number 4. So EarlyEd4All. We also have a blog that we publish 2 to 3 times per week. That's called Eye on Early Education, EYE, on Early Education. And we have a Facebook page. We're working on our YouTube channel right now. If we had more time and more staff resources, we would be communicating all the time because I really think communication is so important. I'm very jealous, actually, of your podcast, Ron, because I think that's what we need to be doing, but also what a lot of folks in the early childhood world need to be doing, finding new mediums and techniques for telling their story.
Totally.
podcasts are popular, so
Yep.
I think increasingly so. So kudos to you for starting it and modeling such a good format for the community.
Thanks, Titus. Appreciate it. And thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been great having you.
Okay, Ron. Thanks again for the conversation. I enjoyed it.
What's your name?
Michaela.
Michaela. How are you?
Hi.
You having fun playing?
Yes.
It's a nice day, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. What's your favorite thing to play out here?
Playing monsters.
You like to play monsters? Do you like the swings? Okay. What else you like to do?
Play my Dora bike.
Oh, with your Dora bike? Oh, okay. Do you ride fast?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, have fun here.